Morning, everybody. Up on the screen is the review of what we talked about yesterday. If you want to look it over as everybody's coming in. This will also be on the midterm, so good time to review. Good question, Lily. I will look and see if I can do that. I believe, let's see. I believe if you go to announcements, it's automatically at the top, but let me look. So up here where it has announcements right here, if you click on it, the very first one that shows is how to access our Zoom class. But I will also look in and see if I can pin it to the top. Let me make sure that's your view as well. Yeah, it looks like it is if you guys click on it. So all I did was on the main page for our class, I clicked on announcements, and here's are all the links for our class and the phone numbers. But I will still see if I can pin it to the top of the announcements. So, as we were discussing yesterday, the thesis statement is the main point of your piece of writing. Short pieces of writing have usually one main point. Novels can have multiple themes or points that they want to make. But generally in a short piece of writing, you're concentrating on one thing you want to get across. You're using your examples, your descriptions, and your explanation to support that one thing and show us how you got to your conclusion. Usually 1 to 3 sentences. It really averages 1 to 2 for most papers. It's usually the last sentence of the first paragraph or the first sentence of the second paragraph. So if you think of it as that layer between the first 2 paragraphs, okay? It is a strong point, not just an observation that doesn't leave you anything to talk about. You know, saying something like dogs are cute. I mean, I guess that could be controversial, but it's more of an observation than a point. Something like dogs make the best pets. That gives you a little bit more room to talk about it. More examples, more things that you can give details on. If you are tempted to use a question, answer the question. You usually have your thesis. You want to make the thesis appropriate to the length of the paper or the assignment that you're asked for. So it's always better to be more specific, to err on the side of being too small than it is to go big. Because if you're too small, you can really flesh out and write a lot of detail and include a lot of examples that really show us what you're talking about. But if you start big, right, then sometimes you realize you're not going to have enough time to cover everything more than superficially. And then you have to chuck out a lot of what you've already talked about. You can't talk about all of global warming in 3 pages or 8 pages or even 10 pages. There are entire books written on the subject, on various aspects of the subject. So if there is a book on your topic, generally it's too big for a short paper, okay? You can't get into examples if you don't have enough time because you're trying to talk about too many different aspects of a topic. Okay? You can always expand and keep all of your work, but if you have to retract, you lose a lot of what you've done. Okay? Longer pieces of writing, or any piece of writing really, can benefit from an essay map. That is a thesis statement that also includes the main points that you'll cover in your paper. Okay, so that's what we talked about yesterday, and then we talked about Adichie's thesis that the danger of having a single story is that you have an overly simplistic view, right, of a people or a country or a concept. That, the world is more complex than that. Also, we talked about the Malcolm X essay, right? Where he was in prison and he had important things that he wanted to say. And the only way he could do that was to teach himself to read and to write in a persuasive and clear manner. And so he found that after he had done that and learned everything that he needed to know, he felt more free than he had ever had in his life, even though he was in prison as this was happening, right? So reading and writing freed him in a way that nothing in his life had up to that point. So just a little review there. Today I want to talk about introductions, because if you don't get your writer or your audience's attention, then you don't have any point to writing the rest of the essay, because they'll stop reading and go do something else, right? So I have a handout here on 8 different techniques that you can use that will get your reader's attention and hopefully keep them reading. Hopefully, if you read magazines or newspapers, you'll have noticed that they use a lot of these techniques. It can depend on the topic as to which one they use. So it's good to kind of keep them all in mind. Be cautious. Like I said, most academic assignments require your thesis to be in the first part of your paper, in between that first and second paragraph. So if you do, I'm giving you permission, right, to put your thesis at the end for this literacy essay that you're working on for Monday. But be sure, because most instructors are going to expect it to be up front. So it's going to be after your intro technique. Tell a story. We love reading stories about real people. They take things from ideas. They take things from ideas that are abstract to things that are more concrete. So if you're doing like a research paper on plastic surgery in teenagers, maybe you start with a teenager who's actually had plastic surgery, like, surgery, rhinoplasty on their nose, and start with their story to get us interested in how this affects real human beings. Okay. Describe something. So maybe your paper's on prison reform. And if there's a need to reform it, obviously there's something wrong. You can describe to us the terrible conditions that you believe need to be addressed. And that gets us into your essay and also provides some evidence of what you're talking about. Use a quotation, something that applies to your topic that really gets us thinking about it. You can look at Bartlett's familiar quotations online. There are a lot of books that collect commonly used quotations. So I told you guys one of my favorite quotes is, "The man who does not read good books has no advantage over the man who can't read them." This could be a good jumping off point for a discussion of book censorship, right? Use a surprising fact or statistic. And generally when you're doing research, if it surprises you, it will surprise your audience. So that's the gauge that you can use when you're looking for something like that. When you read that, where you're like, wow, I didn't realize that, 50% of us will end up in a nursing home, maybe I'm going to pay attention. Or I had someone who did a paper on doing CPR, explaining how to do CPR. And she pointed out that 80% of the time, if you're doing CPR, it's on a friend or a family member. So this gives us definite incentive to learn CPR if you like your friends and family, right? Because we might be saving a life very close to us. Common ground is another one, especially if you're trying to persuade someone that it works well. That means you find what both sides have in common. So if you're doing something like school vouchers, we hope that both sides have quality education as a focus, right? Even if they disagree about how to get there, So if you can establish you both have the same values or goals in your intro, and then go on to talk about why you think your side of the issue is the best way to do that, to accomplish those goals, maybe they're more willing to listen to you if they realize you guys have something in common. Ask a rhetorical question. Now, if you do this, please make an attempt to answer it in the paper, otherwise we're going to feel cheated. If you ask a question, we expect you're going to give us some sort of answer. It doesn't have to be the answer, you know, or a total solution, but it does have to provide some answer to the question. So if you're writing about internet censorship, ask us what the internet will look like in 10 years. You know, I'm wondering, that's a good question, right? And then talk about how your issue will impact if the internet is censored or tiered depending on access, you know, who can pay to play kind of thing. Or if your thesis itself is controversial, you can start the paper with that. So if you believe something like we should torture people in order to get information from terrorists and other criminals, or we should reinstate the draft or eliminate Social Security. Those are all fairly controversial topics. And usually when you're reading about a subject, you'll be able to tell if there are strong feelings about it. So sometimes that itself can be your thesis or your introduction technique. Another one that's useful is provide background information. If we need a little bit of, so if your paper is on the Dreamers and the act that allows kids who are brought here by their parents illegally to go to college and attend school legally, then, you know, we may need to know exactly who's qualifies, what the act involves, what the controversy is. Do not use this, please, as filler. Some people are like, oh, good, I can fill up like 2 pages with just history, you know. People started coming to this country, you know, in 1645. Only deal with the background that we need to know, usually the most recent information on the topic. Okay. So if you're writing about stem cell funding, a brief definition and explanation of their use might be in order, but we don't need to know how they were discovered or the definition of cells or, you know. So only give us the background we need to understand your issue. Okay, so stories, descriptions, quotations, surprising factor statistic, common ground, questions, controversial thesis, background information. And I have put this under announcements on the home page of our class. So if you go to the course home, it's here and it's linked here if you want to download it to hold on to it to study in case you're not able to access the internet at some point. Same thing with thesis statements I posted yesterday. Okay. These are good to have for studying for the midterm. Questions so far? Everybody's good so far? One thing you can do to see examples of this is go look at current news articles because they have to really get your attention and hold it, right? So I've got a couple pulled up here. Here's CNN. Should our children go back to school? Okay. So they're using it in the title, the question. So if we look at the opening, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention just released a roadmap for bringing students back to in-person instruction. About 89% of children in the U.S., however, live in a county considered a red zone with high levels of COVID transmission under that new guidance. Okay. So what kind of introduction technique are they using? They're talking about the U.S. Center for Disease Control, and they tell us 89% of kids live in a red zone with high rates of transmission. So which intro technique is it? Are they telling a story? Not really. Describing something? Nah. Quotation? No. Are they using a fact or statistic? You could call it a little bit of background information, but I found it surprising. Yeah, thank you, Millis. They're using a statistic. 89% of kids live in a red zone. That's a lot of kids. That's, most of them. So that got my attention. And then they're trying to bring back in-person instruction. Of course, a lot of teachers are concerned about that. If they have pre-existing conditions, they're risking their lives. Sure, the risk is low, but it's still a little scary, right? So they use that to establish that there's a real issue, right? All right, let's look at another one. So here's one for BBC News. Demi Lovato had 3 strokes and a heart attack after her 2018 overdose. Okay. The US pop star, 28, says in a new documentary trailer, my doctor said that I had 5 to 10 more minutes. I'm assuming she means to live, right? So if we look at our choices, story a little bit, describe, what do you see here? And then she continues, Lovato also told reporters she'd been left with brain damage, and I still feel the effects of that. Allow me to point out something while we're here, because I see it. You see how the period is on the outside of the quotation mark? This is not the way we do it in the United States. So all of my people who are outside the United States, I apologize. Americans are stubborn people. They don't use the metric system, and they also put their periods inside of quotation marks. Because we're on the British website, they do, however, put their periods outside. If you're doing a research paper, you're going to reverse this if you're doing it in America, at least. So, what kind of introduction technique were they using there to get our attention? Tristan, what do you think? Somebody want to help him out? Mallory? Jonathan?
She kind of uses pathos to describe how it makes her feel and everything whenever she went through whatever she did.
That is yeah. Point. And we're going to get much more into pathos as we get into persuasive writing. Pathos is appealing to the emotions, right? So she is basically talking about how serious her condition was. You could say she's doing a combination of a story and a quote, but they're quoting her directly on these dire things she's saying about her condition at the time, right? You got the quotation marks. And it tells sort of a story. Her doctor said she had maybe 5 minutes to live and she has brain damage. So they're quoting her own words to express how serious her condition was at the time. And it's kind of telling a story that gets you, interested in like, what are the effects of her brain damage and what happened and, what was the result. Okay. So what I'd like you guys to do now is go and look at a news source that you usually look at, or a magazine or a newspaper, and find a story and identify what kind of intro they're using and show it to us. Send me the link in the chat. So find an article or story. Send me a link. Tell me why it got you interested in reading. What kind of technique they're using. And I'm seeing people combine these, so don't worry so much if you're like, I don't know if it's a story or a quotation. We can talk about that. That's why we're doing it and talking about them together. So once you have found an article or story that you can share, please post the link in the chat and I'll pull it up. Or you can share if you feel confident in that. If you go to the screen, there's a share button at the bottom. And you guys have permission to share in Zoom. So post the link or pull it up on your Zoom and share. Show me the articles. Where do you guys usually get your news? Probably get too much of mine from Twitter. Love NPR, Tristan, yes. If you're familiar with public television, NPR is basically the radio version, public radio. Let's see, look at what the stories are today on NPR. Oh, American life expectancy dropped by a full year in the first half of 2020. Yeah. Somebody send me an article. Thanks, Claire. Thank you, Camden. All right, we'll look at Claire's first. Share my screen here. Yeah, the Australian Open tennis tournament's going on. So Naomi Osaka beat Serena Williams in the semifinals, right? We go down here to the introduction. And they ask a thought-provoking question. Did she also, with her win, push Williams closer to retirement? She left to a standing ovation. So yeah, so I would agree. That's a thought-provoking question. Will she retire? How old is she now? I know athletes, she's not very old still, but anybody know how old Serena is? She is 39. But she's still like making it to the semifinals, so wouldn't blame her if she kept playing, right? So yes, good job, Claire. Camden, let's look at yours. Texas water shortage adds to power crisis as the new winter storm moves in. Yeah. So as large parts of Texas wake up to another day of the power crisis, extreme winter weather, issues with the water system added to the misery for much of the state's population. Oh. Yeah, they're telling people to boil tap water, but that's hard if you don't have electricity. I mean, I can do it because I have a gas stove, but a lot of people don't have gas either because there's no electricity to work the pumps for the gas. So yeah, that's going to be problematic. What kind of what made you interested in reading further, Camden? Yeah, I mean, I think the last time was back in 2011. They kind of had a similar problem, but it didn't go on as long as it has this time. Yeah, and so you can see how severe it is. And so then the controversy is, do they prepare for this next time, or do they just assume it won't happen again for another 100 years? And there's disagreement about that, right? All right, Tristan, let's look at yours. But yeah, basically it's telling the story of what's happening in Texas before we move on. And then the boil orders, along with no electricity. Yeah, because they're having a lot of water main breaks. South Dakota hears pro-life testimony on discrimination abortion ban. Okay. In her testimony, Leibel said that a society which prides itself on diversity and inclusiveness should never view Down syndrome as a death sentence. Oh, okay, I think I've heard. Let's see what the first paragraph is. As South Dakota's legislature considers a ban on abortions due to the prenatal diagnosis of Down syndrome, pro-life leaders say the bill would prevent a modern-day form of eugenics. So if I recall, the law is that you cannot abort a child if it just because it has Down syndrome. So they've kind of introduced what the topic is, and they're quoting here, right? Eliminating young lives is not the answer to eliminating disease and disability once the risk of the disorder is identified, says Tara Sander-Lee, Director of Life Sciences at the Charlotte Lozier Institute. Notice, guys, how they are giving us information about who this is. You want to do this also in your papers. This is called a signal phrase, and it signals where the information is coming from. So it said, and it gives her name, but then it also gives her title, Director of Life Sciences at Charlotte Lozier Institute. Okay, because if you just tell me Tara said it, I'm like, well, who's Tara? Why does she have this information? Should I trust what she's saying? So we're going to get more into this as we get into research writing, but this is a good example of identifying where your source information came from. Okay. So it looks like they're using a lot of quotes here, right, to go over the position on why they believe the law should be enacted. Yeah, they're still considering banning abortions due to Down syndrome diagnosis. quotes are powerful. It's nothing like hearing what people have to say about an issue. All right, Lily. Let's see what you got here. All right. Apparently Lisa Kudrow's son has a bond with her friend Jennifer Aniston. Okay. So what got you interested in this, and what kind of introduction do you think it is? Yeah, I mean, but the main focus of the story, right, is about her son's relationship with Jennifer Aniston. It's kind of an interesting story, right? It tells a story about how her son used to mistake them as characters on Friends. So I agree. Yeah, I didn't realize, yeah, that she was that private. So that's an interesting fact. They kind of combine it. We'd be home, and Julian would say, you know, mommy, because he confused them. Yeah. So basically, yeah, he liked Jennifer Aniston when he was young. Yeah. So it's a cute story, right? I like it. Interesting. I want to know what the bond is, so then they explain that. All right, Isabella. Oh my goodness. Oh, what is wrong with people? Two men were arrested in Florida last week after a TikTok video allegedly showed one of them performing an unlicensed C-section on a French bulldog. Wow, guys, what do you think? What kind of intro is that? Sad. Background. Background on what? On what topic? Let's look at the so for background, a brief history to understand your topic. I would say you're probably going more toward telling a story. About these people and their, you know, crazy idea of instead of taking the dog to a vet, and then they tell what happened and who was involved, right? Or you can start with the startling fact: two men were arrested in Florida. It's not that startling that two people were arrested. Unfortunately, it is that they're performing an unlicensed C-section on a dog. So you can see the different techniques that they're using. Okay, if you still owe me a news story, who's got another one? You know it's working if you're tempted to read it. Thank you, Mallory. Country singer Luke Combs took part in a country radio seminar on February 17th, which is yesterday. So let's see. He's apologizing for his previous use of Confederate flag imagery. The 30-year-old performer took part in the country radio seminar event on the 17th, where he discussed fellow singer Morgan Wallen's recent controversy over a video showing him using the N-word. What do you guys think? What kind of intro? Yeah, I would agree. They're telling a story, right? Basically, they're asking about the recent controversy with another country singer, and then he basically brought up something that he was regretful about, which was using the Confederate flag imagery. They even have a quote from him: "There's no excuse for those images. I think as a younger man that it was an image I associated to mean something else." So basically, they let him explain in his own words, in his quote. But yeah, it's basically telling a story about somebody who regrets something they did in the past. Yeah. And it's not as important that you specifically identify the intro, guys, as that you you can see why it interests us, or that you can replicate it getting us interested. All right, we're about out of time. I'm gonna open up for questions for 10 minutes after this. So if you have any questions about what we've been going over, otherwise work on your draft for Monday. And let me know if you have questions about doing the narrative. Remember, it's a shitty first draft. Tell me a story about how language or reading or writing has affected you, and a message that you can share with us about that. All right. And I am available right after class to help you out if you need any information, and the links to what we discussed today are on Brightspace. Okay. All right. Have a good weekend. I'll see you guys on Monday. Unless you have questions, then I'll be right here.